Hello, today I'd like to talk about modern monetary theory and the deficit. Modern monetary theory isn't a political economic model, as you'd find with other things like Marxism and capitalism, etc. It's an explanation of the way the monetary system actually works in the modern day. To begin it, I'd like to start talking about what money is and what money was. Obviously, when people first started trading between each other, it began with barter, but over time it was found that having something else that was representative of the value of goods made barter far easier, made trade far easier. Something that could be used to measure one good against another and could then be traded as a token of the value of the worth. In time, precious metals came to be used for this purpose, probably because of their relative shortage. And certainly in Europe, precious metals became the basis of currency. In his book, The Wealth of Nations, Adam Smith describes quite well the banking system as it began. Original precious metal coins that were in currency, such things as gold, the soft yellow metal, and silver, the soft shiny grey metal, would tend to wear. Many people have seen old coins from the past, gold and silver coins, maybe even newer coins which are of a harder material. I've seen that they can wear over time, which obviously reduced the amount of gold you were getting for your sovereign. The banking system not only allowed a secure storage for such coins, but it prevented the reduction of the value of the coins you owned, because an ounce of gold in the bank would stay an ounce of gold. It wouldn't be worn down by being passed from one person to another. So a piece of paper saying you had an ounce of gold in the bank was worth more than an ounce of gold in currency. This gold standard remained, as well as the use of precious metals in coinage, certainly in Britain till the 1940s, the late 1940s. And in America, they continued to use a gold standard until 1971. At the time when they had a gold standard, of course, that means you needed a certain level of gold in reserves to support your currency that it was based upon. And taxes at those times were needed to keep that level of gold in your reserves to base your currency upon. When the gold standard left, when the societies left, and we had fiat currencies, they were no longer based upon the gold you had in reserve. They were based upon the trust placed in the nation to supply something for that currency. The trust in the nation being based upon the wealth of that nation. That's the wealth of the individual members of that nation, of course, is quite important. If all the citizens really had their own wealth and their own income, they would found that was part of the nation's wealth. The infrastructure of that nation, the way it allowed it to run and work properly, and its manufacturing capabilities. Now, I know some people at this point jump in and mention China and that they've got trillions of dollars in reserve, and say that if China suddenly used all those trillions of dollars to demand goods from America, America couldn't supply. But if China was to do that, it would destroy its own economy, since much of its economy is based upon its supplying goods to America. So in the fiat system, money isn't created from people who mine gold, etc. It isn't created from people who import gold from elsewhere or silver. Money is created from the government. All of the money from these nations, from these sovereign nations with their own currency, comes from the government. It's not created by entrepreneurs. It's not created by people who work. They help create the wealth of the nation sometimes that it's based upon. Sometimes with their entrepreneurs, all they do is shill and take the money from those people who create the wealth of the nation. But the wealth of the nation is the money that individuals have, the infrastructure, the manufacturing capabilities, and the government is the source of the money based upon that wealth. The deficit is the difference between the amount of money that the government put in based upon the trust it has in its nation and the amount of money that has been returned to it. So in fact, the amount of money circulating should be a reflection of the wealth of that nation, and the amount of money it's capable of circulating. So the wealthiest nation in the world, America, should have the largest deficit because it should have the largest amount of money put into circulation so that it can be used by its citizens to enjoy the wealth of that nation. It is not a deficit, it's not a debt, it's an accounting tool and nothing more. The more money that's in the economy, the better for the economy, especially when that money is in the hands of the people at the lower levels of the economy who drive the economy, and especially when it's paid to people who do things like manufacture goods and keep up the infrastructure of the state. It's sometimes considered a debt, but it's only considered a debt because it's been allowed to be privatised. To add to that, the same class of people who insist on it continuing to be privatised are also hoarding a lot of the money that should be in circulation and should be used by the people who would keep the economy running. As I've mentioned in a previous video, there are two presidents who've recognised this, who've realised this. Lincoln created his own currency, and John Wilkes Booth was actually paid by the bankers to kill him. Kennedy put his own currency, billions of dollars into the economy, produced not by the privately owned Federal Reserve Bank, but simply put in the economy to aid it by the government. The day after Kennedy was killed, and there's a lot of conjecture who killed him, and if you look at the conspiracy theories or the theories in general, I won't call them conspiracy theories, they list everybody from Lee Harvey Oswald to his wife. But the day after he was killed, while everybody else was mourning his death, the first action of the American government was to recall all of those dollars that had been issued to him that weren't from the Federal Reserve and acting as a private debt. In essence, a sovereign government with its own currency can spend the money as they wish. They can create money as they wish. A good example of that in this country was that in a time when every penny is being counted and disabled people are having their money took off them, Margaret Thatcher's funeral cost around £40 million and the money was just simply paid and doesn't appear on the accounting rolls anywhere. It doesn't need to appear on the accounting rolls anywhere. The government create and spend money as they wish. They didn't get anything back from our state for it. They don't actually need taxes to do this. They did need taxes in the time when they needed to return gold to their treasury, but they don't need it when it's simply based upon the wealth that's in the nation. The proper function of taxes under this system is to control the economy, to stop some individuals and some corporations from gaining too much power and influence would be one good use of taxes and one appropriate use of taxes. And there should certainly be a large wealth tax on those people who are so rich that they're rich enough to control the government. Other taxes, things like VAT or sales taxes as known in America, are genuinely bad for an economy. They might be useful if an economy was truly booming, but when an economy is suffering, or when sales are down and people finding things difficult, they're an incredibly bad idea as a tax. Incidentally, VAT is only a temporary measure. We've been promised that by Parliament. They promised it was only a temporary measure when they brought it in to help pay for the Napoleonic Wars. Income tax should only come in for those who don't need to be controlled, for those who aren't super rich. when there's too much money in the economy. And the measure of too much money in the economy is when inflation becomes unmanageable due to supply not meeting demand. As in, everybody's in work, everybody's working, so everybody's part of the productivity and the supply of goods. And at that point, the supply of goods is insufficient to meet the demand and inflation becomes unmanageable. At that point, there should be progressive taxes that work from the top down. And that's when there should be progressive taxes. And those progressive taxes should only be there until inflation's come under control, because at the point where inflation's come under control, you've controlled the problem you had with too much money supply, because then supply is meeting demand. So why do things continue the way they are? Well, it has to be said that if you keep the system going the way it is and keep taxing the poor and not taxing the rich, and the rich grow richer and richer, and the assets of the rich become more valuable because it's more difficult to buy them, but the assets of the poor become less valuable because the poor need to start selling assets simply to maintain or to survive. The poor start to find that things like local businesses who need customers don't get the customers because they don't have the money in circulation. And all the local shops shut, and then because those shops are shut and running derelict, they can be bought cheaply by the large non-tax-paying corporations. That's why in this country, as well as large malls, shopping malls, the same as they have in America, owned large supermarkets, owned by people like Tesco and Asda, they're starting to buy up all the small local stores that used to be owned by what are called mom and pop businesses. And small businessmen still think that they should support the government, and they still complain about taxes in general rather than complain about unfair taxes. So that's a brief description of what's happening. It's an explanation of the way money works, and it should be used when considering what would be the best way or the best economic model. And I would perhaps cover different economic models in a future video. Thank you very much for your time.